Mr. Turmes, China does not take an as hard position as everybody was expecting in the Bali treaties. So, as a member of the Chinese delegation of the European Parliament, what do you think about this change of position or this unexpected position of China taking?
So I'm not so surprised because the Chinese elite knows that climate change is a real threat to the whole billion people living in China. If the Himalaya glaciers would melt down, where would be the drinking water for several hundred of millions of people? And China is quite affected also by issues like hurricanes and so on. On the other hand, the Chinese elite knows that their actual way of economic development is also bringing them to enormous economic problems when it comes to resources. Right. Where is the oil to run a lot of cars in China? And so they know that they need to change, and if they can change in an international context, that will help them. What are the problems which we have to address? One is China's enormous growth in industry capacity on energy-intensive goods like aluminium, steel, chemical and so on. And in a certain way, China is really the worst country in the world because it has such a high coal power production to produce primary aluminium or other energy-intensive goods. Mm-hmm. That's an area where Europe and China can join forces by trying to do a level playing field at world level for energy-intensive goods. We are thinking to do this through the design of the next phase of the European trading system in January, linking it to importers of steel to Europe to eventually purchase certificates for CO2 on the European ETS scheme. The second big problem for China is the enormous development of buildings, of cars, so the whole infrastructure. China builds in 1 year more square meters than the whole industrial world. And again, China has on paper good laws, but they have not really the capacity, so not the training, the trained workforce, nor certain technologies to build as efficient as, for example, in Europe. Mm-hmm. So also on that, Europe and China can join forces to agree on technology transfer and on common projects to move the energy and climate change agenda forward.
Another issue that's coming up right now is deforestation. We had the statement of a green representative from Australia who was of course in favor of the change of position on the Kyoto Protocol, but she mentioned also the fact that Australia is still in the business in deforestation and this is causing big problems. So what could Europe do on this issue?
Climate change is only one symptom of a more profound crisis of our today economics, which is resource-intensive ways, for example, to produce food, but also to produce paper. And in that sense, India and China, which are catching up now with volumes of resources we need in Australia, US, in Europe, that creates, of course, enormous pressure also on primary forests. So it is absolutely necessary that in the next phase of climate change negotiations, we get a special chapter on deforestation and where we can also create financial incentives for the countries which have still primary forests to protect them, and on the other hand economies like the European, the US, the Australian, but also China and India have to be much more resource efficient when it comes to paper, but also to food diets.
Of course, the whole question of deforestation has to do with biofuels and the big tendency in Europe to replace petrol by biofuels. So do you think that there can be any solution for this contradiction in policies?
There is double pressure on arable land and therefore
yes.
on deforestation. One is from the diet changes, so millions of new middle classes in India and China going away from vegetarian diet to meat and also fish. And in addition to that, we have now the policy in US and maybe in Europe on having also production of biomass-based fuels. This is a very dangerous way to go down in this moment. I think we have first to secure the primary forests. We have first to secure to feed the world, and then only we can on some maybe set aside land, but probably much more on using waste streams, be it in the forest business, but also in the agri-alimentary sector. Use the waste from these sectors, potentially can produce some fuel from biomass, but doing it with the wrong policies we have today will bring more pressure on deforestation, which is bad for climate and bad for biodiversity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed.